You know, if you think about it, and maybe you never have, but if you think about it, we live in a world where there's some really weird and unusual and bizarre animals. And one of the things I like to do when I have a few minutes is go to websites that will headline the world's 50 most bizarre creatures. And I love to spend time scrolling through the images of the different creatures and then reading their descriptions. And it's a lot of fun. But then oftentimes my thoughts turn to maybe a little bit deeper question, and that is, why would God create a world where there's such weird and odd and bizarre creatures? Right? Why would God create a world where there's such unusual creatures? What is the purpose of these creatures? And we're going to take on that question today, and as we do, I think what we're going to see is that the answer to this question tells us something profound about who God is, but also something profound about who we are in light of our relationship with God. But before we get into some heavy theology and philosophy and a little bit of science, I thought it would be fun just to take a couple of minutes and show you a few of the odd creatures that have attracted my attention over the years. So we're just going to have a little slideshow here of some odd creatures. So anybody know what that is, out of curiosity? It's a sea pig, right? And a sea pig is actually related to starfish and sea cucumbers. These are creatures that live in the deepest parts of the ocean floor. And in fact, they're in some areas of the world's oceans, they're dominant creatures. They're scavengers where they will walk around the ground on these tube-like legs. They have these appendages on their back that pick up nutrients in the Earth's oceans, and they move towards the nutrients, and they essentially scavenge. In fact, there are some images of whale carcasses at the ocean floor just covered with thousands and thousands of sea pigs. All right, this one is an interesting creature. This fish is called the red-lipped batfish, right? And no, the fish did not get Botox, but it's a weird fish that lives on the seafloor off the Galapagos Islands, and it's not able to swim. It actually uses its fins to kind of move around on the ground. This one is adorable, right? This is the pink fairy armadillo. Now, who wouldn't want to have this as a pet, right? Look at how cute that creature is. It lives in the desert of Chile, but unfortunately, you cannot have it as a pet because when it's removed from its natural habitat, it dies within days. And nobody quite knows why that's the case. Okay, for all of you junior high boys and junior high boys at heart, like me, this is perhaps my favorite. This is called the bird-dropping spider. It's a master of mimicry, and it looks like bird droppings, which is a great way to ward off predators for obvious reasons, right? It's found in the coastal area of Australia, and in fact, at night it will build these elaborate webs and release pheromones that mimic moth pheromones as a way to attract prey to the web. This is called the thistledown velvet ant. And this is found in the desert southwest of the U.S., and it is not an ant, it's actually a wasp. And it has one of the longest stingers of any wasp species. And so its thistle in velvet structure or appearance is to ward off predators. And then finally, this is a creature that maybe not even its mother can love. This is called the star-nosed mole. In fact, this is a Canadian animal, by the way, found in the wetlands of North America, the northern part of North America. And it's blind. It's a mole. It's blind, and it has a star-shaped nose where there are 25 appendages, and on each appendage there are these thousands of these hair-like structures called Elmer's organs that give it a heightened sense of smell and taste and not taste, but smell and touch, and allows it to move through its environment. Okay, so we could spend all day looking at weird animals and have a lot of fun, but again, it raises the question, why would God create these weird and unusual and bizarre animals? What is their purpose, right? What purpose could they have? And believe it or not, this question actually represents a serious challenge to the idea that there is a creator that's responsible for life. That many skeptics who will raise this very question, and they will argue that it doesn't make sense for a creator to create these kind of unusual creatures that don't seem to have any kind of real purpose. But yet this is exactly what you would expect evolution to produce. That the evolutionary process is an unguided, undirected process that just simply meanders around producing creatures without any really rhyme or reason. And if they are successful and they can survive, then they persist. And that there is no rhyme or reason, that these odd and unusual creatures reflect an evolutionary history of life. In fact, J.B.S. Haldane, who is a well-known geneticist, lived in the early 1900s, in fact, was one of the founders of the discipline of genetics, was also an atheist. According to the story, gave a lecture once, and after the lecture, an elderly woman came up to him and asked him the question, what does his study of creation tell him about God? And this was his response. He said, well, if one could conclude as to the nature of a creator from a study of creation, it would appear that God has an inordinate fondness for stars and beetles. And he was being tongue-in-cheek because when you look at the heavens, there are probably 100 trillion stars. And the question is, what is the purpose of this vast, the vastness of space? But also when we look at beetles, there's over 100,000 species of beetles. And the question is, why would God create that many beetles when really a smaller number of species could fulfill their role in ecosystems? So, why would God create a world where there's such wanton biodiversity, right? Well, as a Christian apologist who works in the life sciences, my first response would be to try to come up with reasons why God would create these creatures, right? And I realized a number of years ago that when I do that, I'm actually pigeonholing God. I'm actually thinking about God like an engineer. And there's nothing wrong with that, but because I believe that God does indeed create things within the world that are just right, that are the way they're supposed to be, that they have a purpose and a function to be certain. But I think to think about God only as an engineer really is not a correct view of God. That we should think about God as the creator as much as an artist as an engineer. And could it be that what we see in the universe, that we see here on earth, that we see when we look at the animal kingdom, a reflection of God's artistry? Could it be that what we're seeing is an artistic expression on the part of a creator that reflects his playfulness and his frivolity as much as purpose and function? And if we think about God as an artist, then suddenly this challenge to the idea that there is a creator responsible for life evaporates, right? Because the reason why God would create the star-nosed mole is because this is a creature that reflects God's artistry. Now, it's all well and good to think about God in philosophical terms, but what does Scripture tell us about God's nature, about God's character? Does Scripture support the idea that God is an artist? Well, I think the answer is yes. When I look at the Genesis 1 creation account, after each day of creation, God pauses and says that it is good. Right? And to me, when I think about that passage, I almost get this image of God pausing what he's doing like an artist would pause when they're working on a project, take a step back and just absorb what he or she has created, right? And then revel in it. I see that the same for God. And when you look at the end of the Genesis 1 creation account, it said, God saw all he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in their vast array. There's an element of artistry to what God has done. And it's interesting because in Hebrew, the word that's translated as good is tov. And that means good, but it also means beautiful. It also means made as intended. So when God creates, after each day of creation, he's pausing to declare that what he has made is as he intended. What he has made is beautiful. It is good. Another passage of scripture that I find fascinating is Psalm 104. Psalm 104 is a creation psalm. The psalmist, presumably David, is writing this psalm reflecting upon the creation, and as a result of that, using that as inspiration to praise and celebrate God. Psalm 104 is not only a creation psalm, but it also is a creation account, because different portions of Psalm 104 correspond to the different days of creation in Genesis 1. And it's a lot of fun to sit down with Genesis 1 and Psalm 104 to see if you can find that correspondence. That's your homework this week, is to do that. But in the portion of Psalm 104 that corresponds to the fifth day of creation, it says this: "How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is the sea, vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number, living things both large and small. There the ships go to and fro, and the Leviathan which you formed to frolic there." In Hebrew, Leviathan would be a large sea creature. So presumably this is referring to whales or maybe dolphins and porpoises. But the point here is that God created the Leviathan to play among the ships. That's the type of thing that an artist does. Or if we look into the Gospels, like the Gospel of Luke, we see when people are expressing worry that Jesus admonishes them, and he says, "Consider how the lilies grow. They don't work or make clothes for themselves, but I tell you that even Solomon with his riches was not dressed as beautifully as one of these flowers." Right? So God is indeed an artist. He is an engineer, but he is also an artist as well. And that it's worth taking time to pause when we're outside and we're in nature to just look at the world around us and think about not only the Creator's handiwork that's in front of us, but the artistry that is displayed by the Creator in everything that he makes. Now, one of the things that this discussion leads us to is an argument that we can make for God's existence by thinking about God as an artist. And this is called the argument from beauty. In my opinion, this is an underutilized argument. I know that Ken loves to make this argument, and I love to make this argument as well. This is a powerful argument, but it also is an argument that is accessible to someone who isn't necessarily a philosopher or a scientist or a theologian. This is an argument that anybody can make, and it's a powerful argument. It's an argument that has an intellectual aspect, but an emotional aspect to it as well. Because we all appreciate the beauty of the world that we live in, and this argument is built on the beauty of the world. And there's a number of philosophers and scholars who have advanced this argument. The one that I'm going to point to today is Richard Swinburne, who's at Oxford University, I believe. Is that right, Ken? in the UK. Interestingly enough, he is a colleague of Richard Dawkins, the well-known atheist. He is one of the world's leading Christian philosophers. And his argument for God from beauty actually has two aspects to it. There are two aspects to it. The first is the fact that the universe that we live in is beautiful. And he says if God creates a universe, as a good workman, he will create a beautiful universe. On the other hand, if the universe comes into existence without being created by God, there's no reason to suppose that it would be a beautiful universe. This is an argument to the best explanation. That's what he's doing here. He's arguing to the best explanation. Right? What is the best way to explain the beauty of the universe? Well, if the universe is a brute reality, just the product of quantum fluctuations or something like that in an infinitely existing gravitational field, why would something like that produce a world that's beautiful? But if there is a creator, like the God of the Bible that produced the world, we would expect it to be beautiful. We would expect it to be beautiful. Now, the second part is, how is it possible that we as human beings can appreciate that beauty? And Swinburne continues when he says, there is certainly no particular reason why, if the universe originated uncaused, psychophysical laws would bring about aesthetic sensibilities in human beings. That as human beings, we have this ability to appreciate beauty, to seek out beauty and immerse ourselves in beauty. And his question is, why would evolutionary processes create human beings to appreciate beauty? And we're going to unpack that more in a minute. But he said, if we're made in God's image, then of course we would be created in such a way to appreciate the beauty that God of the universe, of the world around us, because that beauty reflects the Creator's glory and majesty. But the whole argument really hinges on who are we as human beings, right? And why is it that we can appreciate beauty? And in fact, from an evolutionary perspective, the origin of our aesthetic sense, our ability to appreciate beauty, is an enigma. It is a problem that evolutionary biologists cannot explain. They cannot explain. And it's not just simply that we like things that are beautiful and we spend a bit of time here and there trying to create things that are beautiful ourselves. We are obsessed with beauty. That we are obsessed immersing ourselves in beauty, in contemplating beauty. And as human beings, we spend enormous amount of resources and effort and time trying to create things that are beautiful ourselves. And then, once we've created it, we want people to spend time appreciating those things that we have made that are beautiful, right? And we actually, as human beings, seek out the work of other human beings who've made things that are beautiful. We spend all kinds of time consumed with experiencing and creating things that are beautiful. And this is what two evolutionary biologists write in a journal article. This is a little thick and a little dense, but there's a very powerful point here, where they say aesthetically driven activities are not marginal phenomena or elite behavior without significance in ordinary life. Humans in all cultures spend a significant amount of time engaged in activities such as listening to or telling fictional stories, participating in various forms of imaginative pretense, thinking about imaginary worlds, experiencing the imaginary creations of others, and creating public representations designed to communicate fictional experiences to others. Involvement in fictional imagined worlds appears to be a cross-culturally universal species-typical phenomena. Involvement in the imaginative arts appears to be intrinsically rewarding activity without utilitarian payoff. In other words, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, you are obsessed with beauty. And most of the things that we create that are beautiful are imaginary. It's depicting something that is imaginary, and that we love doing that, and we love appreciating the work of other people. And this is Again, not something we do on the side. This is our obsession as human beings. And there's no utilitarian payoff, and means, from an evolutionary perspective, the time that you're spending making cave art or producing musical instruments or writing poetry or telling stories is time that you're not spending going out and hunting and killing something so you can eat, or finding shelter so you can stay safe, right? It detracts from your survivability to obsess with art. There's no evolutionary payoff. Mohan Mathan, who I believe is a philosopher here at the University of Toronto, said this: why is this good from an evolutionary point of view? Why is it valuable to be absorbed in contemplation with all the attendant dangers of reduced vigilance? Wasting time and energy puts organisms at an evolutionary disadvantage. For large animals such as us, unnecessary activity is particularly expensive. So Swinburne is right that there is no evolutionary explanation for our aesthetic sense. But of course, from a Christian perspective, we understand that explanation is found in the idea that we bear God's image. And because we bear God's image, we are compelled to create. And the way I like to think about it is that maybe one way to think about the image of God is that it reflects the fact that we are co-creators. That we are co-creators. Now, let me unpack that idea a little bit. When you look at the Genesis 1 creation account, we see that human beings are made in God's image. The Bible doesn't ever really define what the image of God is. And so theologians have wrestled with this question over the centuries. But we know that because we bear God's image, we have a special status in the creation. We have special responsibilities that God gave to Adam and Eve and to their descendants, which is us, right? And that responsibility is to, first of all, to multiply and fill the earth. That we're to subdue the earth and bring it under our control. That we were to rule over the earth, and we were to be stewards of the planet, caretakers of the planet. And the image that I have is of the Garden of Eden being this special place, this sacred place where humans and God were in fellowship with each other. And that God expected Adam and Eve, as they multiplied and filled the earth and subdued the earth and ruled over the earth, is that they would take the order in the Garden of Eden and spread it outside of the Garden of Eden, turning the chaotic world that was unfinished by God into a finished product that reflected the Garden of Eden. And in that sense, Adam and Eve were co-stewards with God, they were co-rulers with God, but they were also to be co-creators. Philip Hefner is a theologian who advanced this idea of human beings being co-creators. And he said this: we are to create on behalf of God. We are co-creators just as we are co-stewards and co-rulers. Because we possess God's essence in the image of God as the crown of his creation, we become partners with God. We aren't passive subjects of God's creation, but we have become active participants in which we create new things. As image bearers, we have been imbued with the cognitive and rational capacity to create. We have also been imbued with the will and the desire to create. We are compulsive creators. We have a creative spirit within us. Now, I'm going to close by just offering this reflection, that if we think about the fact that as image bearers, we are creators, it means whenever we create, no matter what it is, we are glorifying God because the image of God is being fully expressed. And that when we are in a right relationship with God through the person of Christ, that when we create, we are entering into a special type of fellowship with the Creator as we create. Because as image bearers, we are doing what only God himself can do, and that is to create. And so when we produce a painting, when we produce a sculpture, when we write a story, we tell a story, when we produce poetry, when we read the poetry of others, when we dance, when we design dances, when we engage in choreography, right? When we design a building, when we design a highway, when we develop a scientific theory, all of this involves creativity that is only possible for human beings to engage in because we bear God's image. But again, when we create as Christians, we are in this special heart relationship with God. We connect to God in a special way through our creativity. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. So thank you so much.